Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. So I'm Amanda Helman.
I'm Joe Franzo.
And we're from Colonial Intermediate Unit 20. And today we're going to be presenting Updating Transition Planning Assessment. Assessment leads to purposeful instruction. So before we begin, how many of you are administrators in the audience? How many, just raise your hand. Okay, how many of you are teachers? How many of you are parents? Okay, how many of you are advocates? Related service? Consultants? I see some of you. Okay, did I miss anybody? Okay, well, hopefully we'll welcome all of you. We're really excited to share with you some of the process we've done with transition at IU20, and just feel free, if you do have questions, we will have some time for that, and we'd love to, have a lot of discussion, okay?
All right. You chose the right session, by the way. All right, we're going to start with a quote. Whether at the end of a tunnel, through a crack in the door, or a flash of an idea, it is always there, heralding a new beginning.
I picked that.
She picked that, and I said, I really don't know what that means.
And so I said, Joe, well, it's really just deep. It just means that, as you're going through and the unknown, there's always new beginnings. It's kind of just like transition, right? Sometimes some things are coming, and sometimes not. So that was our little discussion with the quote.
And I still don't fully understand it, but I'm going to work on that. All right, so at the top it says Colonial Intermediate Unit 20. We are a service agency for 13 districts in Monroe, Northampton, and Pike County, and we provide educational services for students with special needs there, in case you're wondering about that. And why change the transition assessment and instruction process? So we realized that there was some issues with it. There was no assessment plan or process in place. Consistency of assessment was necessary for all students, need for appropriate transition goals, and plan for secondary students, and vocational and independent instruction based on data. So we saw a need for these assessments. Yep. Okay, let me make sure I'm following my notes so far. All right. So what is transition planning? Students' vision, planning centered on student goals and services, a coordinated set of activities, results-oriented, promoting movement from school to post-school activities. Basically, we're looking at transition at this point from 14 to 21 and into adulthood. What do you think about transition? Do you have any other definitions of transition? And we have to speak into the microphone if you have any comments. And we give out candy for comments. So, anybody want to volunteer their impressions of transition that they have in their situation, whether it be an administrator, a teacher, a parent?
Just be one word or a phrase. What is transition? I'm sorry?
Confusing. All right, that's excellent. Do you want to expand on that? We can have Amanda give you the microphone.
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Okay. Well, you can pick a piece of candy.
Check 1 2 check. I just want to make sure you
There
hear
you
this
go.
loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
All right, they're butterscotch. They're like a grandma candy, but
mints.
they're or mints. All right, so transition means a different thing if you're an administrator, if you're a teacher, or if you're a parent. So we're going to approach all those different aspects of transition assessment. All right, so best practices. Quality assessments identify skill needs resulting in effective instructional planning. Basically, we need data to drive our instructional planning. And where do you get that data? From assessments. But which assessments and why? Okay. So we have student involvement. It's their plan. The student is the reason why we're planning for transition. Parental involvement. They're the biggest supporters of the child because they're the main supports. Interagency collaboration. You have local, state, federal agencies, supports coordinators helping with the finances and funding. And then hitting upon the three main areas in your IEP of employment, independent living, and post-secondary education. Any questions or comments so far? We're rolling right along. All right.
Okay, so now we're going to go through our transition process. And so really looking at how did we begin, what kind of committees did we form, and how did we go through and identify important, what's our process. So, if you can click that.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Thanks.
The 6 areas we'll talk about today. First, selecting assessments. So what did we do to identify the best quality assessments for our students at the IU? And the intermediate unit, we have quite a bit of a range of students, right? Students with more complex needs, multiple disabilities, as students who may have emotional behavioral disorders, students who are graduating at age 18, and then our students that are graduating later. So we really had quite a task. So what did that look like? Then we'll go into our transition assessment protocol. And we will be giving that out to you when we talk about it. So we'll be able to navigate that with you and get your input. And then we'll be talking about how do we analyze the different assessments that we created, and then adapting assessments that we can, that we could, such as informal assessments. And I'll talk about that as we go. And then professional development training. How did we train? We trained everybody across programs at the IU once we had finalized the protocol, the assessments, and then also it's an ongoing process. So we'll talk about that for the adaptation, and then coaching. So even last year, at the end of the year to this year, what are we doing to help facilitate this and make sure it's ongoing, and that our teachers and our educators and related service teachers and providers are also on board and understand the process. Okay. Sure.
Did you develop this protocol for, I'll just talk louder.
Sure. Oh, I'm
We
sorry.
have to
yeah.
talk into the microphone, otherwise they don't
have
hear us.
one? Okay.
They're recording this
She
session,
has
so
one. Okay.
we appreciate your.
She has one.
Oh, okay.
Have you developed the protocol for your IU programs or for the programs in your entire intermediate unit districts?
Good question. This protocol was for the IU20, so our programs. However, depending on districts, we haven't really trained the districts on ours. I know other districts have created some of their own protocols. Does that answer that? Let's see.
We have, let's see, autistic support, life skills support, MDS, multiple disabilities, physical support, deaf and hard of hearing,
Therapeutic, yeah.
vision, therapeutic emotional support, partial hospitalization.
So
We
let's
pretty
say-
much
yeah.
run the gamut of services for the school districts. Some school districts have their own life skills or emotional support, but for the students who have more significant needs, that's who
Right.
we provide services to.
Right. Yep. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying.
All right, so selecting the assessments.
Thanks, Joe. Can you change that for me?
All right.
Just-
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so for assessment, you have the answer on there. So
Oh,
for
sorry.
transition assessment, what is a transition assessment to you? We just showed the definition, and it might be that you have the PDF, but maybe you have a different answer. So what is a transition assessment? Anyone?
It informs students' interests and aptitudes.
Okay, informed student interest and aptitudes, thanks. I'm gonna give you can get 2 pieces, you sure? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, Joe has it. So again, it's ongoing process, right, for our assessment. It could be paper, that's situational assessments, and it really looks at students' interest, looks at their work interests, their skills for work. And then again, all of those different things we get, their strengths and areas of need, should help us formulate goals that would be practical and relevant and meaningful for students as they're continuing on for post-school outcomes, okay? And this really is, Mary Morningstar, she does a lot with transition. This is one of her definitions that I really, it speaks to me just in terms of that ongoing process. And there is that reiterative process, meaning even in our IU with our protocol, if there are things that aren't working, we're finding students aren't, even with adaptations, if they're still not having progress or it's not capturing their actual strengths or needs, then we'll change that. So just so you know, we'll talk about that too. Okay. So for this, we had a core team. So really it was our special education director and then a couple of supervisors, so Joe and Dan and myself, and our transition specialist, and we all got together first just to really look at, and we knew that there was some lacking in the assessments and based on the IEPs of effective transition planning and assessments that led to quality instruction. So that was one of the big things. So we met as a team, and then we looked at the transition research. So, you know, what is the research out there? What is it telling us about assessment? And it's hard because, especially for a transition assessment, you may or may not know, not everything is valid or reliable. And you have a lot of students with complex needs, so how do we measure that, right? So they had some standardized and reliable or measures, but a lot of that included parent, educator, and student input. And so we'd use, you know, and there's a lot of informal assessments out there that are helpful, but we know that there's, we're still looking at what is the best way. So again, that can be a little tricky, but what really is out there? So we really took some time to do that. And then we wanted to get input from the educators in the program. So what were they doing in the classroom? What were their needs, right? We wanted to hear from the teachers. And we anticipated that there may be a lack, right, in transition, just based on the needs and even the districts and what we were seeing. And then we reviewed the transition assessments that we found, you know, based on the research, evidence-based practices, and so that was our big process to start with. Okay. That's okay.
So here's the survey we sent out. This is an email that I just pulled up because I tried to put it in a different format and it didn't work. So basically it talks about what program are you in, list the services you're currently doing for post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. This is all for teachers. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of this process, we wanted to get input from the educators that were serving our students. So there's a question over there. So we had to do research about what assessments are there and what are they doing in their classrooms, because at this point, they're somewhat isolated in the sense that they're doing their own thing, as I can imagine a lot of you are, if there is no protocol and process. So that's what we found we needed, was that protocol. But we had to start somewhere, so we started with input from our teachers.
Okay, do you have a question related to that?
Yes, I do.
Sure.
As far as the input from the teachers, did you get input just from special ed teachers? Did you also get input from general ed teachers? That sometimes I would just be curious.
That's a good question. Mm-hmm. We stuck to special education teachers because they're the ones that typically do the transition assessments that go into an IEP. Most of the other, like a regular education teacher, would do a transition assessment based on maybe the guidance office, more geared towards post-secondary education or a VOTEC, technical school, something like that. Whereas our assessments are dealing with those three aspects of post-secondary education, independent living, and employment. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second.
Mike, I have the loud mouth. Oh, sorry. Did you also get input from employers? Because they're the ones that eventually our students are going to be dealing with, because they can provide the best tools for the assessment. Coming from a business background, I know what a lot of different managers are looking for. Was that part of your assessment protocol?
No, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. Because this was the beginning of the process. Right. So we're going to take you through the process, and we're going to let you know where we are now and then where we're going. And that's basically where we're going at this point. Mm-hmm. And this process started around 2016.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, but those are great, and even with the adding
you're exactly
educators or adding businesses, that's absolutely, now that we have this foundation, we certainly can expand. I love that you asked about that, and the teachers.
Okay, so how do you use the assessments? How do you engage parents in transition planning? How do you engage students in transition planning? Do you reach out for support? Are you familiar with the community agencies? So we're just gathering information from the teachers about what they currently do. That's basically what the whole survey was about. And then we reviewed the survey. So in-service trainings and that type of thing. All right, going back to this. All right, so we got the core transition team. We reviewed the transition assessment research and the survey. So what were the results? We found that we have a need for comprehensive assessments for secondary students. Well, we kind of knew that at the beginning, but the results of the survey really kind of solidified that for us. Development of transition assessments that would help identify their strengths, so we needed to give them something to work with. A strong need to use assessments to drive instruction. So the assessments may have been done in isolation. They may have been done just for a present level in an IEP, but they weren't really driving instruction. And then the need for support in developing transition present levels in IEP goals. So even if they were in the present levels, they weren't really comprehensive. You know, we really wanted to push that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to talk about creating the transition protocol. And so really, probably in 2015 or 16, I had been at a conference, I think it was probably PDE or something, probably PDE, and Dr. James Martin was talking about assessment protocols. And so what we did was I really liked how he had an organization and his model, so we adapted it to our IU20 and what it looks like. And so he had an assessment planning protocol, and it was for secondary students. So really that's typically ages 14 to 21, although hopefully as we do this, we're hopefully anticipate that'll be for younger students as well, but right now we want this solid. And for each grade level, approximately, we found 3 different assessments for grade 14 or grade 15. There might be some more or less. And so we really designed it that way. And then we really wanted to be individual based, but we also know that depending on programs, because again, we don't want to silo, but we figured some programs, so for example, like students for emotional behavioral disorders, they may graduate at age 18, right? Or depending on the need. So we had to adapt some of that, like what did it look like age 14 through 18, or students who graduate, you know, at age 21. And then depending on the program, we knew that it might look a little different, like some students might not take all those assessments, and that would be based on student need. So we also knew there was some, you could adapt based on students. And then we differentiate assessments. So later we'll show you we had at least 3 levels of adaptation for assessment, knowing that there are more, right? You can't just have, but it's a good way to help teachers at least try those levels, knowing their students, or giving them ideas for what else they may need. And so again, the assessments we used when we talk about them were the informal assessments, things that you can actually adapt because they're not valid or reliable measures.
Okay. This is continuing.
Yep. So again, what we did was we created the transition protocol, and we gave a description of each of the assessments on our protocol, so teachers would have them. And then we updated them to our website, and it's currently our CIU20 website is in process for transition, but we have everything, and we'll show you in one place, although it's just a work in progress right now. So almost like a one-stop transition resource. So all of our protocol, adapted assessments, we have cover letters we'll show you, anything for OVR, any type of things like that we wanted to have to help teachers just go to one place. And then we also updated the transition protocol, so everything's all in one stop, basically.
Okay, and at this point, we're going to pass out the transition assessment protocol that we've developed for the IU20. Oh, yes.
Sure. So I'm just going to pass them down. Just take them and then cross rows. There you go.
Website accessible to the public or just to your teachers?
I think just to our teachers, yeah. That's okay. Oh, perfect, yeah. Hi there. You're welcome. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sure. I think I gave him 3. Okay, oops.
Yes.
There you go.
Do you have a question?
You're welcome. Need one? Okay, so I ran out, but let me see if they have more. Oh, she'll give you one. I think she has them too. So, If you have extras on this side, I can get them, and then, thank you. Anybody else have extras? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and then if you need them, just raise your hand. I'll come around. Everybody have one? Okay. Here you go. The whole row. Oh, no, that's okay. Do you have one? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So does everybody have a copy?
All right, and I'm going to show them the website?
Yep, sure.
All right.
And it's not accessible to everybody. Someone asked, so.
Okay. All right, so here is what we have now on the website. So teachers, this is for access for teachers and administrators to access. So here at the top is the transition assessment protocol, which is what we just handed out. This version is a little bit different and a little more comprehensive. So we added a few things. So as you're looking at it, it addresses transition assessments in each age group, each program, and each area of transition. So these are the assessments or surveys. This is the programs that would be most appropriate for those assessments. And what area of transition does it approach?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving down past what you have in the handouts, we have the descriptions of each of the assessments.
Yeah,
Now, what teachers can do with this is they can copy and paste it into an IEP, and then the results should be summarized. So this gives a summary of each assessment so that parents understand what we were going for, or anybody reading the IEP, what was this assessment supposed to assess?
And we wanted to have common language, so teachers, this was what it was, so we wrote that up as a committee. And we had another teacher, an educator committee of different teachers from the different programs as well. And so that was helpful, but we have this, we didn't give this to you because again, it's ongoing, but we have this for teachers, so they at least had the description, but they would have to do the assessment, and those results would look different for each student. So that would at least help them as they're going through, so they didn't have to look it up and explain it.
Okay.
And so even for the protocol, again, it is about individual students, but we did think about different programs and different students in them and what it looks like, but it really is. So for example, we've had some teachers who wanted to give the Mary Morningstar her survey early, the parent survey, because it really is a good assessment and really thinks the topic, so she gave it a little early, but that would be based on a student account, student by student basis. And again, with this, it depends, it really does vary on student need, okay? Yeah, so we have all the links up there, so they have the assessments, so they can just click on it, look at it, and we'll show you later the adapted assessment folder. Yes?
You said the common language you use for each assessment. Is that on your website?
We have it's on our transition protocol, and it's on our website, but the website isn't available, I don't think, this part for the public. It's just for educators, like the employers from IE20. Is that right, Joe? I don't think you can access.
That's right.
But
Is it an employee of your district or an employee from another IE?
it would have to be IE20, and I don't know, again, depending on like our directors or whatever, if they're going to expand that. That would be a question beyond what we can answer right now. But we currently, right now, it's just for IU20. But sharing it, that would just be a question for one of the directors.
Do you have on there the difference between formal and informal?
We had some of that in there, but we actually decided, and we were talking with one of our speech language teachers, and we didn't include that verbiage, I don't believe, in it.
A lot of times the formal assessments are the ones you get hung up on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and we really didn't have as many, because again, depending on that, so we have some, and as we navigate every year, we look at it to see is there anything else out there, but a lot of that, especially for students with more complex needs, you're going to have, that, and well, we had the tag, but again, depending on students, yep.
Okay. Oh, did we do the review?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that. Okay. Or, yeah.
Oh.
You skipped a few.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Okay. So when we looked at this, we set up our professional development for our educators. We had the hearing and vision, which was helpful. When we had these assessments, just to talk about what does it look like. We went across every program. They had 4 or 3 the first year, 2 hours professional development plus a huge orientation day when we had this out. So we gave them at least a 3-hour overview, a full day overview, and then 3 different professional development hours. We looked at the protocol, we talked about that. We went through the assessments. We really talked about what is assessment, what does informal or standardized assessments look like. And we went through transition planning. And then we practiced the ones that were standardized. We practiced some of those assessments that were harder to score to make sure all teachers understood the process. And then we had them practice with one of their students. And then every time they had a training, they had to bring back that assessment and then ask questions. So we wanted to make sure there was follow-up and that they had practice. So if they had questions or if there were concerns, we could address it, and that would help us with the feedback. And then we also practice with how to write up the present levels. So if we have our assessment, and then how do we look at the assessment data to instruction? Now, obviously, some of you know, depending on hours, for me, I'd love to have 20 hours the whole year, right? Just for transition. That doesn't always happen. So we have maybe 2-hour sessions every year. But for follow-up, we're like, well, how do we do this? So we'll talk about it, but basically doing a lot more videos and trying to do some coaching, even for our transition teacher committee, to be able to go out this year and get some more videos, which we'll talk about later. And then looking at standardized, that's the reliable and valid assessments, versus informal measures that aren't. Looked at the norm across different populations, but they can be adapted and changed. You can say something different. So what we did, and even at some of our trainings, we had teachers start to adapt assessments for their students, and we had a huge folder for those assessments because we wanted them to be part of the process and to get their feedback. So again, they did assess their own students, and then we checked for understanding at trainings, and that was really important. So then professional development, so I just added a couple slides about what did it look like when we did our training for a data to assessment. So I always think of it like farm to table, right? The assessment instruction, you need that, really that's the most healthiest model. So looking at the student transition assessment data, what does it look like, and talking about how do we do this? And then what are the students' needs? Like, where are their areas of need? And where are their strengths? And how can we use that together? And then we looked at data across students. So I had different student samples with present levels and had all their data, and we had a whole training leading them through that. And then we looked at what are common skill areas that they need. And then I had them pick areas for their class, or what would it look like if you did that. And then we looked at certain things like Zero Center with Dr. James Martin. That's one of the places that has really good, I think, and based on his research, really good evidence. And TACT, so again, another center for transition that has evidence-based lessons, and also things that, as we were building this, we were still looking at what are the most effective resources. But this was a way to show teachers, if you're doing assessment or informal, it could be a group thing, right? You can assess them, then do something if it's a career employment, for example, and have them watch a couple of videos or talk about it. And then having them choose their lessons and then differentiate. So we really went over that model to help them start using that data and say, well, what do we do with it, right? We just have this, but how does it impact our instruction?
So the main theme here is it's a work in progress. We roll it out, we train the teachers, we assess their understanding of it, and then we continue to monitor it for effectiveness and completeness, so that we're putting out the best that we can, and then we're adapting it as we go. So with that, we met with the core team, we selected one assessment to review. We created a second assessment that had less complex vocabulary and more pictures, and a third assessment that had at least 3 pictures with less wording. It's very similar to, if you are familiar with the PASA, they have level A, B, and C. We try to level it so that all students, were covered on that. Then provided an online accessible folder for all educators for the adapted assessments. So I'll show that to you next, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. So all the adapted assessments are available on the website as well. And then we created parent and guardian letters with an explanation of the transition assessments.
So we're going to show you a couple of the assessments, and then we'll have an example of what that looks like and review it and have some questions or discussion.
Okay, so right on their website, on the resources, we have the transition assessment adaptation folder. So you open that up, and these are all teacher-generated or transition committee-generated. So we can just pick one, like community functional skills
The
assessment.
original, yeah.
So is that the original? Yes. So they can go to the original, and this is what it looks like. And these are informal assessments. We're only adapting informal assessments because we can't adapt formal assessments. Okay, so identifies leisure activities, identifies public restrooms, etc. So then we had the
I think that might have been the original.
next, that was the original.
Is it?
And then this,
Oh, yeah.
this kind of breaks it down in more simple language. Identifies things to do for fun, that kind of thing, and then yes, no, or with support. And then the third adaptation is more picture-based,
Yeah.
identifies fun things to do, public restrooms. So
Yeah,
the
and-
content is the same.
Yeah, and for this, just so you know, and you're gonna see it, but we decided to have, at the end, we had different pictures, but yes or no like this, and it'll be across that level 3. Now, we know that there may be other needs in an adaptation, like for students who have communication devices, right? Or other types of, like students who have vision needs, right? You might have adaptations, but we wanted to at least show what that verbiage might look like across at least 3 levels. So we know that and teachers know that there may be a need for more adaptation, but this is what we did in starting those adaptations. And then if teachers do adapt it further, they can give it to the committee and we just check it over and then we can add it just to make sure we have that consistency. But we want this to be a team and a big IU20 approach, so we welcome our teachers or related service to also give us if they adapt it further. Okay.
So if you have a no on here, that would be an area of need that you might want to approach in your instruction in the classroom for any of these areas. So the next aspect of
Can I show another example?
another example?
Yeah.
Sure. Social skills, how about that?
Sure.
Okay, so this looks like the original
Yeah.
because it's a PDF.
Yeah, we figured out how to take the header off of the original for our secondary adaptation.
Okay, so this takes a lot of work. So the transition committee
Yeah.
generated all of these, and actually some teachers had taken some of the assessments in their own classrooms, had adapted them, and then uploaded them to the folder. So not only can you access information from the folder, you can also upload information to the folder to share with all the other teachers. It's
It did. It took us some time, and even because we meet usually 4 times a year as a committee, and we had other things that we're doing, and so we have a list of things, but we finally finalized it this year because it was just figuring out what's our formatting. You know, we know that there's different levels, but how can we do this to at least give them idea and have a level. So it did take some time, but now we have it. So we're really wanting to have teachers go through them, and then if there is a need for greater assessment, or we find, okay, this might not be appropriate for, X, Y, like this student, then we know, and we can look at other things. But we really wanted to have some time to give them to look at this and use it. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any intentions on using these assessments with younger students?
yes.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think eventually. Do you want her to ask it again? I'm sorry. Go ahead, so they can hear it. I think we're being videotaped, so they just need to hear it.
Do you have any plans on using this with younger, elementary age? Just looking at the picture
Yeah.
ones, those would be fantastic to even get a baseline.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I know Joe said that, and I think obviously with the PA career readiness, work standards, and that's been nice too, because as we've been doing this, a lot of our teachers, even students 14 to 21, they're already doing this, the assessments, right? They're doing that instruction, and so we've been able to, and I believe as we're going, we're first solidifying that age, but we do want to go younger and have that activities, and that's that's absolutely where we're
Well,
going.
these actually fit in nicely with
Yeah.
Act 339. Anybody familiar with Act
Yeah.
339?
Right.
If you're not familiar with it, it's a new law that
Yeah.
says we have to provide evidences that we are approaching transition and career readiness in Pennsylvania for students starting in third grade?
Third grade.
Third grade. Okay, so we need to provide evidences that we're working on different aspects of transition as early as third grade. And the elementary teachers will have access to this folder as well. They may want to pull out an assessment and do it with a student, and that can be their evidence that they can provide or upload to wherever. So
Right.
that's an excellent question. And we were planning on doing that anyway, but Act 339 actually fit in nicely with what we were doing.
Yeah.
And somebody said, this sounds like a lot of work. And it is, but this is a matter of years, and it's
Yeah.
been an evolution
Yeah.
of identifying needs as we go. So at any point, we're like, all right, this is great. And then we say, but we need to work more on this, or we need, like, there's new teachers that come on board
Right.
that haven't gotten the initial training. So now we're doing the videos like you'll be talking about
Absolutely.
later.
Yeah,
So-
sure. And also, because it's comprehensive, and I'm always thinking ahead, we're also looking at instruction. So we have assessments, right? But then how do we have a folder for, here's some ways to do some instruction? So we have that there. So this is ongoing, and we're still in the process. So we meet so many times a year, but we do have plans to continue to expand, and we'll talk about that too.
All right, so another important aspect that we discovered was that when we first rolled this out, a lot of the assessments go home to the parents, and then when the parents come in for IEP meetings, the IEP is reviewed with them, and then we come to the transition portion of the IEP, and parents were pretty blown away. Our assessments were not that comprehensive prior to us rolling this out. Once we rolled it out, it was comprehensive, and to be honest, it was overwhelming to parents. We had a lot of tears at meetings, and it was more tears than I've ever seen in that year based on transition, because the parents were now faced with, even though their student may have been 14 or 15, they are going to become 21. They are going to age out, and they are going to become an adult and have these needs, and we need to approach it now. And because it was so comprehensive, we decided we were going to have the parent letters to roll out, which are
Yeah, and we
here.
wanted to have common language. So Joe's going to show them, but we wanted to have language so that when teachers are sending them out, they that they have they understand what we're doing.
So it talks about what's happening at age 14. It tells the exact assessments that we're going to be doing for their child, and explains a lot of it up front. It prepares them for not only receiving some of the assessments that are coming home for them to fill out, but when they get to the meeting, we're going to be discussing these things, and don't be shocked by this. If you have any questions, let us know.
Right.
So,
And age 14, obviously, because that's the huge year, we really had a more extensive letter. Not that we did for other years, but it really explains what's the process. We had additional parts on like how they can get in contact, right, with OVR or any of those different offices that they needed to, whatever their need would be on different ages. So we kind of followed the Educator 13, like the checklist, the planning guides, but again, we wanted to make sure everything was there for parents.
so as you can see on the different age levels, there's all the different assessments. Any questions? With the
sure.
microphone. Saw a hand go up.
No, that's okay. Oh, I think the screen somehow went that way.
So as I'm looking
she
at
did.
your matrix, so if I have a student who's in one of your programs, potentially they're 14, do they have a choice of those assessments, or those are all the assessments that they would be taking
So if you
at
look-
age 14?
If you look at the protocol, the first page is age 14, and it says that the first one is applying the personal preference indicators to post-secondary adult living, employment, education, and that one is specific to the CIU programs of autistic support, multiple disabilities, and physical support, and they address the areas of education, employment, and independent living. The next one is the
all
IU-generated
students.
parent guardian transition guide or survey, and that's for all the different programs. So they can't pick and choose.
That's what I, yeah, that was my question.
These are what they're doing.
Okay.
And if you notice in your protocol, they're all different, moving from age group to age group, so that we're not repeating the same assessments.
Right.
However, some assessments are repeated in different, so if you had it in 14, you may want to have it at 17 again
right.
to see any growth or additional needs based on that specific assessment.
And that's a good question. Sorry, there was,
Question over here.
yeah, if you have a question. And while she's getting ready, we did have specific assessments. We tried to do it twice, but ones that where they were near 20 or 21 and graduating, we wanted to make sure we had updated assessments. So when they were leaving, we would have that information. So we felt strongly about that too. Sorry, your question.
No problem. So when I do the employment assessments with the students age 14 to 21 in our district, what I have found, this is just the employment part, is they all give you the same answers. It's that Holland scale, which in fact I just looked at us, I didn't forget anything. Realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional, which it really doesn't tell you a whole lot. They do give you some samples of what, jobs are in that category. Right. In your research, have you found anything that's more specific than that? Because the older you get, you want the specifics.
So the reason why we have multiple measures and assessments in each age group is to get that overall picture, so we're not relying on that one assessment. As a teacher, when I was teaching, I would use a few different. I had the picture interest inventory, I had the Brigance, and then a few online things like you were talking about, and I would plug them into the present levels of transition, and I might have part of that generated in the transition portion of the IEP. It didn't really do anything. It didn't drive instruction. So, we had our own sets of things, but it was necessary to do it, so we did it. This is beyond that, to make it more meaningful, not only to understand more, but to drive instruction. So you're exactly right.
Yeah.
But we need that big overall picture.
And I would just say too, in terms of looking at the employment, there are some limitations. I mean, we're still looking, but those were the few we could find. And then I think, as I know, there's a lot more with interactive videos and showing careers. So I feel like during that instruction that helps. But yeah, I do think there's still more research, and we're still looking for the best too. So that's what we have is what we found. But again, as we're going, that's a good question.
Where are the results kept in the assessments for each child then, once they're like going, where is all of this held for each student?
Excellent. So, anybody in education and parents know that when you write present levels of educational performance, academic achievement, you wipe the slate clean and generate new ones. For this protocol, we take the age group and we list it from 14, 15, 16, 17, and on up, so that we give them an overall snapshot of how they're progressing through their age groups and with the assessments, so that you can see where they were, where they're going, where they are now, and hopefully where they will go. So it's all kept in the IEP. It's not wiped clean. It's all kept chronologically.
Year after year. Yeah, great.
Do you house the actual assessments? Where would you?
The teachers would keep it in in their classroom folders.
Yeah.
So that's where you would keep the evidence.
Yeah.
To use it for.
Right.
Yeah. Eventually, hopefully, we'll have something online, accessible online, but that's not the case right now.
Yeah, Google Drive for each student.
Yeah, not right now, but I'm not sure. Yeah, but that's a great.
It's actually going to evolve into that because of Act 339.
Right.
Sure.
And actually, I think we.
Yeah, there are some that we are having, so based on that, and I see that question, we do have things where they're uploading or a couple of those assessments each year.
We have a web-based program now that we're going to have a training on, that we're going to upload all of our Act 339 evidences into this web-based program that every district will have access to. So if they go through an audit and the district needs to provide those evidences to the audit, they will have everything at their disposal.
Yeah.
And any parent that would want to see any of those type of things, they would be readily accessible there too. So excellent question. Okay. Yes.
So I do see a lot of what most of us have is for the employment, their interest in employment. Have you found any that have worked really well to assess their employability skills? So like a lot of their soft skill stuff and anything like that, so that we could work on enhancing their employability skills?
I mean, I would say right now we're still looking, but that would be more that situational assessments, and that, again, we haven't done that part of it. This has been just that informal, but that task analysis breakdown and whatnot. But besides that, I haven't found any additional. I mean, that's a great question. That's something we'll be looking at this year as well, looking at our assessments and seeing if there's anything out there. But yeah, it is. And then, obviously we've been creating lots, so most likely we'll do some of that. But that's a great area for moving forward.
To kind of comment on what she had said about where to store this stuff. For my schools, each classroom has their portfolio binder. And then within that, you have your artifacts. But then also within that, I have an assessment for the Bergants and that kind of thing that's put in there with it, alongside with the 3 artifacts or 2 artifacts or whatever the teachers have for that, for the indicator 13 and different things.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, everybody does it differently, and that's how we had to do it this year. But again, next year we're going to have it so that because we have to provide, our agency has to provide all that information to the districts themselves. You're within a district, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So we're in a little bit of a different situation. We don't have them come to us and we house it. We disseminate it to the districts. At this point, we had to do it, through paper and portfolios, and moving forward, we're going to be able to do it by uploading it and having it digital so that there's no paper and everything's right there for them.
Right. Great questions.
Yep. And sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure, because I'm in IU 19.
Okay.
Sorry, I think she's going to come over.
Wait.
Hold on, she's just going to come over to the microphone. Sorry.
The question is.
Sorry, oh boy.
Go ahead.
I'm in IU 19,
Right.
and I was just curious if you guys are all the IUs are kind of simultaneously working on this same type of project.
Well, there's a Pennsylvania IU organization, PAIU, and I believe we're going to be presenting at that as well.
Beautiful.
And we
Thank
may be able to share out. Again, that's an administrative decision that's above my pay grade. But again, we want to share out these ideas so that you can take this and take it back to your districts and your organizations and do something similar. And roll it out so that you have a more comprehensive way, a more complete way of having the assessments across all age levels and ability levels.
Yep. So now I'm going to be passing out an example.
Oh,
we
yes.
showed you the folder, but we have one example of the original assessment. So we have one more handout for you. I know we had a couple online, but it has the original. So we'll be sending these your way. If you just pass them back, turn around. Thank you. Oh, there you go. Okay, just pass them down. Just have you pass these. There we go. I'm sorry. Is there any more? Yeah.
Yep, there's some more. So here's the example of the adapted assessment.
You guys have some? Oh, you have some?
So again, these are informal assessments that you can take, you can adapt, and in order to share it out to everyone, we made those 3 levels, that A, B, and C level. However,
Oh, yeah, let me go get it.
it's also individualized. So a teacher may see the B level or the A level, and they may want to adapt it further. That's okay. And they may even put that into the folder as well. So now that there's a 4th or a 5th way to adapt the assessment.
Thank you. So again, you can just look at it. Did everybody get a copy? Okay, great.
Okay, this is your part.
Oh, sure. Can you, one of the ladies needed a protocol. Can you take it back there for her?
Where?
In the back. Okay, so for the transition committee, what's next? We talked a lot about coaching. So we had our teachers in our transition committee. We have about 7 teachers, and they were doing some of the assessment to instruction. We had them just start there. And now what we're planning on doing is some of our committee, on the days we have the committee in the afternoon, for us to go out to different teachers and get video of the assessment, instructional assessment, and also the instruction and the actual assessments, so that we can put it on our site so that teachers have access. So if we have new teachers, and depending on training, they can see, how do I assess standardized or the informal assessments? How do I use things in groups for small groups? How do I do this for students with multiple disability? How do I do this for students with autism? Potentially, right? But there might be group kids we know, individual students individualized students, but they will have access to that and see what does it look like. So that's really what we're doing, and we'll have those online just for our educators. And then again, we will have that transition assessment and look at our current assessments and see if we need to update that. But those coaching things may just be on like a few times this year, because again, it can be really hard, but on the days we have our teachers, we can do some of that and just see how it goes. But that's our plans for the next year or two or more. And then when we looked at this for factors with this, we had letters to parents, because at first, we didn't want to have people just sending out all kinds of things, and we wanted to have that common language. It was a culture shift, right? Because we, depending on if they didn't have anything or they were just using one assessment, that was different for a lot of our educators. So we really worked with them and made sure we're checking in and talk to them about this. And then, as Joe mentioned before, there's a grieving process, right? And so when parents, if they're, they hadn't been given these plethora of assessments and their students are 16 or 17 and they haven't faced or looked at some of these areas of assessment, that's bringing up, pain or grief, anger, all the stages, right, of emotions that is normal for any of us, even if we're looking at stuff. So we really worked with our teachers and our parents, and it also, even though it was really hard, it also made us more aware of the importance of doing this early, right, and having the students involved or talking about it with parents early so that it's not, they're still going to go through it, but they're going to be used to it, right? For our kids who are 14, it might be a little shocker, but some of the assessments, especially the Morningstar, talks about things after school, right? Or planning or funding. And those are things that are scary to face, but we have to look at, right? And so we really were sensitive to that, but that's what happened. And then again, looking at how do we train teachers. So that was a big one, because we did a big training, but then each year, again, what does that look like? So we really are doing a lot more online modules for our teachers as we go through for new teachers.
So that was a pretty much a summary of what we talked about with the Act 339 evidences as well. And understandably, there's a lot to do as a special education teacher. So most special education teachers just focus on the IEP, 3 different areas of transition in employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. But there's person-centered planning that can be more complete, more comprehensive that you can do, and these assessments can hopefully drive that as well. And
we have a question.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sure.
So this is kind of twofold. Can you elaborate a little bit about that culture shift for teachers?
Sure.
How did you get them on board?
Sure.
How did you also get, and I realize like you're in an IU, so you're only dealing with special ed students.
Correct.
However, I come from a district.
Sure.
So how do I get, how do I get administration on board with giving me time with those special ed teachers to create assessments that are comprehensive for everyone?
Can I answer first? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So, I know you have something to say too, but so I think what happened first is we did the training and we knew that it might be, we took baby steps, meaning very small, having them just use one student. So like a case study, what does it look like? And we had them coming back and saying, wow, I didn't realize that I missed some of the strengths of the student, or I didn't really realize that this student knew this. And so I think as we did that slowly over the first year, and we were like, this is what we're doing, and we had those different trainings, so they didn't have to do that one till we did the training, it helps, because we had the protocol, we're like, we're gonna do this throughout the year. So we set it up in incremental steps, so that, and we set it up to ask for feedback. And I think because near the end of the year, they saw that they had so much more knowledge about the student, that was the buy-in. And we did take that slow and hear them, so that it wasn't just like, here, you got to go. They had to realize it was so important because they got more about the student and they could see that.
Right, so there was a lot about the student that they learned, but also as educators, you get a lot of things thrown at you from administration. Here, do this, and there's not really a lot of explanation. We were very careful. In our IU, we don't adhere to the Act 80 days of districts. We have an orientation week where we provide all our training all at once. So during the orientation week, we had an entire day with all of the educators that were going to be rolling this out, so that we had the buy-in at that point, so that they understood going into the next school year what they needed to do and what support they were going to be given.
Right.
So that really helped as well, because they didn't go into it like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm not going to do it. They said, we're going to try it, we're going to pilot it with these few students, and then they rolled it out, and that's how it evolved.
Yeah. That's a great question. And it might look a little different, but that's just my, suggestion, that incremental.
Just advocating for students. The question was getting administrators on board. And if you speak to an administrator about this is a student need and that we're not addressing at this time and we need to address it, hopefully, as an administrator, I would certainly listen to that and say, well, what do you propose?
Yeah.
And then you would come at them with a plan possibly similar to this and say, we need a more comprehensive way of looking at assessment that would drive instruction for transition to adulthood.
Right. Yeah.
So, which brings us to educator feedback.
Is that me?
That's you.
Oh, that's me. Okay, so again, when we looked at that, they really appreciate the consistent assessments across the classroom that they didn't have before. And they're accessible, and they had the website, and a lot of them had commented and created dialogue, and they really liked some of the surveys, and they found that it was helpful. And although in the beginning, right, it was overwhelming, just like, what does this look like? But because we kind of really, it's probably year 3 now, and I feel like it took some time, just even with parents and the educators, but we have a lot more in place, and I feel like they're used to it. And they also see the difference, again, not just with the IEP, because again, yes, that's the paperwork, but the student, right? We're here for the student. We want the student to have meaningful outcomes. And so if we have that in place, everything else comes, right? And so we really have seen a shift with this.
Okay, and school districts, our stakeholders for the IU are our districts that we serve. So we wanted to get feedback from them as well. And they all agree that the present levels of performance with regard to transition was more comprehensive. Transition assessments provided insight about the student's ability. It creates a running record, and transition IEP goals were more applicable to the individual in terms of the assessment driving the instruction. And then another aspect of it was Indicator 13, which is part of the audit that goes on for every school district every 3 years. They were weak in the area of Indicator 13 because it goes through a very comprehensive checklist of what needs to be in that transition plan. And this kind of buttoned up a lot of those aspects, so we had much stronger audits for the districts, which they appreciated. Okay, and that brings us to the end.
Yes.
If you have any questions for us or comments, we have the microphone.
And we'll be here too, and we appreciate the comments throughout. But yeah, if there's
Yeah.
any final questions.
And if you want candy,
go.
come on up. Because you all did great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Amanda, for the work that you're doing. It's incredible and needed.
Thank you.